January 31st, 1945, Clark Air Base, Luzon, Philippines. Major Frank T. McCoy's hands steadied the camera as he photographed the aircraft before him, an intact Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber, tail number 763-12. This was no salvaged wreckage. It was a complete operational bomber abandoned by its crew during the rapid American advance, offering an unparalleled look at Japanese aviation technology. For months, Allied forces had been puzzled by the almost unbelievable vulnerability of this particular bomber, often mocking it with the grim nickname the Flying Lighter, or even the more morbid One-Shot Betty. McCoy, commander of the Technical Air Intelligence Unit, had examined countless crashed Japanese planes across the Pacific, but this single, undamaged aircraft held a secret that would fundamentally alter the American understanding of their enemy's entire military philosophy. The bomber's massive cylindrical fuselage, the very feature that earned it the Japanese pilot's own nickname, hamaki, or cigar, gleamed in the Philippine sun, measuring nearly 20 meters from nose to tail. It sat poised on its tricycle gear, its 25-meter wingspan indicating its tremendous reach. The twin 14-cylinder radial engines, each capable of producing 1,500 horsepower, were in perfect condition. But McCoy's full attention was not on the engines or the sleek aerodynamics. It was on what he discovered inside the wings, past the inspection panels. It was a finding that would revolutionize Allied comprehension of Japanese aviation doctrine. The fuel tanks were completely, utterly unprotected. There was no self-sealing rubber compound to instantly clot bullet holes, no armor plating to deflect incoming rounds, no fire suppression systems to halt a growing blaze, and no protective coatings of any kind. All that separated thousands of liters of highly volatile, high-octane aviation fuel from enemy machine gun fire was a thin aluminum skin, perhaps barely 2 millimeters thick. The reality of this design decision was stark, terrifying, and brilliant in its cold-blooded logic. No Western Air Force, McCoy thought, would build a bomber this way, deliberately sacrificing the crew's chance of survival for an incremental gain in performance. Yet this G4M Betty, the very backbone of the Imperial Japanese Navy's land-based bomber force, was designed exactly this way. The design of the Betty originated in 1937 with a demanding specification from the Imperial Japanese Navy known as the 12 The Navy required a twin-engine bomber that could carry a massive 800-kilogram torpedo or an equivalent bomb load over a range previously unheard of for a land-based aircraft, over 2,400 nautical miles. This was a direct consequence of the vast distances of the Pacific theater and the Japanese naval strategy, which required land-based aircraft to operate far from established bases, providing long-range anti-shipping and strike capability. The technical challenge was immense. To meet the necessary speed and range requirements with only 2 engines, the Mitsubishi design team, led by Kiro Honjo, was forced to make radical and ultimately fatal compromises. Every pound of weight saved translated directly into greater range. To achieve the required performance, the designers had to ruthlessly eliminate non-essential weight. Armor plating for the crew and vital components was scrapped. More critically, the heavy, multi-layered rubber that composed self-sealing fuel tanks was omitted. The wings themselves were essentially massive, unsealed fuel bladders. The result was a stunningly effective machine in terms of initial performance. The G4M could outrun many early Allied fighters and had an operational radius that gave the Japanese a decisive strategic advantage in the war's opening stages. It was the only bomber in the world at the time capable of making the long-distance strikes the Japanese Navy demanded. The Betty immediately proved its worth. Its most significant early triumph came just days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, when G4M squadrons, alongside the older G3M Nels, executed a devastating coordinated attack that resulted in the sinking of the formidable British battleship HMS Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser HMS Repulse off the coast of Malaya. This single action proved the overwhelming strategic power of the land-based bomber against capital ships, validating the core design premise of the Japanese Navy. However, this early success came against aircraft lacking modern defensive armament and under-equipped for the torpedo bomber threat. Once Allied fighter opposition hardened, particularly with the introduction of superior aircraft like the Grumman F-4 Wildcat and later the F-6 Hellcat, the Betty's vulnerability became catastrophic.
It was during the brutal, protracted campaigns for Guadalcanal and the Solomon Islands that the Betty's deadly flaw became legend. American and Allied pilots quickly learned that striking the G4M's enormous wings was almost a guaranteed way to ignite the aircraft. A single, well-placed burst from a .50 caliber machine gun could instantly turn the bomber into a fireball. The unprotected fuel tanks, combined with the extensive use of lightweight alloys, meant the plane was incredibly vulnerable to even minor damage. Living up to its derogatory Allied nicknames, while American bombers like the B-25 Mitchell were designed with self-sealing tanks, crew armor, and structural redundancy, the G4M was a glass cannon. It could deal a heavy blow, but it shattered instantly upon impact. The price for its stellar range was the certain immolation of its crew under fire. Japanese designers did attempt to improve survivability, but only in later variants and often too late to matter. The G4M2 introduced slightly more powerful engines and an enlarged fuselage, but retained the fundamental design flaw. By 1943, recognizing the unacceptable losses, a variant known as the G4M3 was developed. This model finally incorporated self-sealing tanks, crew armor, and fire-resistant materials. The structural weight ballooned, resulting in a significant decrease in the precious range and speed the aircraft was originally designed for. The G4M3 was a safe bomber, but it was no longer a Betty, and its reduced performance meant only a tiny number were produced before the end of the war, having no meaningful impact on the air war. The fate of the design, and indeed of the Japanese Bomber Corps, was already sealed by the flawed priorities of the original specification. The final chapter of the Betty's combat career cemented its tragic reputation. A modified version of the bomber, the G4M2E, served as the launch platform for the MYX-7 Oka, the rocket-powered piloted suicide bomb. In this ultimate expression of sacrificing man for the mission, the Betty was repurposed to deliver the human missile to its release point, often under heavy attack, a mission from which neither the bomber nor the Oka pilot was ever expected to return. The plane that had been designed to maximize range by sacrificing its crew's protection was literally the platform for a human torpedo, symbolizing the Japanese military's institutional acceptance of catastrophic casualties as a mission cost. The Betty's legacy extends beyond aviation history into fundamental questions about aircraft design, philosophy, military ethics, acceptable risk, and the value of human life in warfare. American designers answered those questions by prioritizing protection even at the cost of performance, focusing on bringing the crew home to fight another day. Japanese designers answered differently, with the philosophy that the mission was paramount and the individual cost was secondary. The Betty bomber stands as undeniable evidence of what happens when capability is prioritized over survivability, when extreme range is purchased with crew lives, and when performance requirements override basic protection considerations. The thousands of burning Betty bombers across the Pacific sky marked the catastrophic consequences of that philosophical difference, revealing the fundamental difference between how the opposing nations approached warfare. American forces designed aircraft to bring crews home. Japanese forces designed aircraft to reach targets regardless of the cost to the men inside. In the end, the nation that valued crew survival built an air force that could sustain operations indefinitely through superior training and retained experience. The nation that accepted catastrophic casualties for performance advantages built an air force that destroyed itself through brutal, irrecoverable attrition. The examination of tail number 763-12 at Clark Field provided the final, undeniable proof of what Allied forces had suspected for years. The Betty bomber was not poorly designed in a technical sense. It was brilliantly designed to achieve specific, uncompromising goals. But those goals simply did not include bringing Japanese crews home alive. And in that single, chilling fact lies the entire story of why Japan ultimately lost the Pacific War.